Hi there, and welcome to See Yourself in Cybersecurity Basics for Small Business by Small Business. My name is Leanna Wade, and I am the Public Policy Associate at ACT, the App Association. In celebration of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, the App Association joins the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the National Cybersecurity Alliance in leading a collaborative effort to raise cyber safety awareness nationally and internationally for small to medium-sized businesses. Roughly 43% of cyber attacks are aimed at small businesses, but only 14% are prepared to defend themselves. Not only can a cyber attack disrupt normal operations, but it can cause damage to important IT assets and infrastructure that can be detrimental to the resilience of the small app developer community. Today's Fireside Chat will explore the biggest threats facing small businesses, what measures should be taken to mitigate vulnerability, and how technical frameworks like SCRUM can help put people at the center of cybersecurity. We are privileged to have speakers who are both experts in this field and App Association members take us through their experiences. Nikos Kiourtis is co-head of research and development at Quokka. Quokka prioritizes proactive mobile app protection through app vetting, regulatory compliance, app security testing, and much more. And Chris Sims, who is the founder and CEO of CAVU. With over 20 years of programming and 16 years of project management experience, Chris leverages his mastery of agile philosophy, Scrum methodology, and mentoring techniques to build collaborative and creative project teams that are empowered to deliver dynamic cyber solutions. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic to Chris to kick off this conversation.
Thank you, Leanna, and excited to be here today with Nikos. It's been fascinating to get to know him over the last little bit. Nikos, why don't we start? Talk a little bit about your perspective working with small businesses. Why do small businesses need to care about cybersecurity? It's often when we're small businesses or a startup, we're worried more about are we building the right product? And oftentimes, cybersecurity is not something we really think about. Talk about why it is actually important for us.
Yeah, sure, Chris. So basically, when you're a small business, one of the things that you have a problem with is that you have a small team at some point. So you start with a smaller team, you want to build a killer product, you want to get it out as fast as you can. So your income, your revenue stream might be not existent at this point. So you're trying to get all these things done at a very short period of time. So it is only natural that you will try to cut corners wherever you can. One of the problems that definitely small businesses don't take into account is budgeting for a proper and secure architecture of the products that they want to develop and deploy. This might not be a problem in the beginning as the company is small, but definitely as the company evolves, organically grows, this might be a problem later on. This will be a problem later on. So one of the things that is definitely overlooked is how do you enforce secure coding practices, some reproducible build workflows that are potentially in the cloud or local that can be audited, you can spot bugs easily. How are you going to be outsourcing your development into other teams because your team is small enough at this point and you can't really afford hiring everybody for every single component you want to deploy, to develop, things like that. I'm pretty sure that from the DevSecOps courses that you give, a lot of people don't give consideration to these items. I don't know if you have any example to provide for people that come to you for specific training on that.
Yeah. With DevSecOps and Scrum, these are terms that often I see all the time. Companies are just not thinking about. Small businesses, they're trying to build their app. They're trying to get just a grasp on the basic fundamentals of just running a business and surviving to the next day. I know I've definitely been there as a small business person. And we hear terms like DevSecOps and we hear terms like Scrum, and those are things for big companies, or we'll think about that one day. You actually told a story the other day that I thought was, it's the kind of story that I've seen time and time again. I probably made similar decisions, but one that would keep me up at night. Talk a little about the experience. You were talking about a company that was building an app that outsourced it and took on someone else's problems.
So that was a few years ago. So basically, we're talking about a company that wants to build a mobile application. Now, a little bit of context here. When you're building a mobile application, you need to take security a little bit more seriously, because what you're dealing right now is the user's data, user's private data, because this application resides on a user's phone, which is a very personal device. It can potentially have access to their contacts, their calendar, their location, all these things that are very private to the user. So what this company did was that they wanted to, regardless of what the actual product is, they outsourced the development, and the other group were using third-party frameworks that facilitated the communication with certain private resources. For example, they only needed access to the user's calendar at this point. Now, the framework they used, though, enabled access to also record audio and location and other things. It was like an umbrella framework. It was a third party. It was an open source offering that they used, and they delivered the final product to them. They came back to us to audit the resulting application before submitting it to the app stores. And we uncovered all these issues that this application can potentially access more things if the code is exploited, or if the developers do not put the proper measures there to enable or disable that, or just be transparent to the user as to what this app is doing. When going back to the code, of course, naturally to the developers, these couldn't find where this is handled, because that was actually from a linked component. This basically enables them will give them this is a supply chain attack at this point. If this other open source project changes a maintainer and some malicious actor takes control over it, because that's a very lucrative target, the top open source components that are used throughout, many deployments are the number one targets for hackers. Then at this point, they could inject their own malicious code that has not been audited by either the developers or the parent company at this point. And you're having foreign code in your product that is deployed in millions of devices through the App Store, accessing very personal data, and potentially, I don't want to get into that, exfiltrating or doing all sorts of things that you don't want to deal with. It's a nightmare at this point.
Yeah. So a well-meaning small business, a startup, a company that's trying to just solve the next human problem, all of a sudden you become subject to someone else's bad practice or someone else. And even there's a third party there. So it wasn't just your company you outsourced, but it was who they outsourced part of their work for, where they got part of their code. Now there's this set of exposures, places that hackers can get in, bad actors can get in, and all of a sudden you're exposed to a lot of potential negative things that maybe your app doesn't even mean to do. Maybe your app doesn't need to record audio, and all of a sudden, because you have this platform, you're unintentionally doing something. So as a small business, that seems daunting and overwhelming. If I'm trying to start up something and now I've got to worry about that, what are some tips and tricks that you might recommend to the next small business that's looking to do something so that they can avoid these pitfalls and build something that is more secure?
Sure. So first of all, when building a mobile application, because we discussed this right just now, both Google and Apple have extensive documentation and best practice about how to go about creating, accessing private resources. So that should be the number one resource that everybody is turning to. Aside from that, and in a more general sense, when you're deploying a new software product, you probably want to scale it at some point. You're a small company, you might have an on-prem installation that you offer to your clients. Later on, as you organically grow, you will have to move it into a cloud setting. A good security practice here is to always test the cloud deployment, because that's a different scenario at this point. The environment is not the same. Network latencies, data transfers are different. This could have undesirable effects. Also, the security assumptions that you make in an on-premise deployment is different from a cloud offering. How your services communicate with each other is not the same. How you will end up exposing them, between each other is not the same as you'll have to do in the cloud. So you will need to make sure that you do this from the very beginning to save you a lot of headaches later when you have to pretty much redesign everything. But aside from that, make sure you audit your code as you are for code quality. A good practice, a good security practice, which fits well into the DevSecOps pipeline, is to audit it regularly with every commit using a number of tools that are there. For example, SonarQube is one of them, which is an open source version of it. It gives you code smells, it gives you potential vulnerabilities, bugs, anything that you can detect. If you end up getting binary deliverables from another team because you outsource them, then make sure that there's also tools for that. For example, our QMAS solution that I mentioned does that. It audits the final product right before submission to the App Store and gives you a number of security vulnerabilities, potential weaknesses in the code, and pretty much anything that is wrong with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, you need to make sure that you do this every step of the way. And of course, budget for a proper and secure architecture from the start. I can't reiterate this enough. I know this is also something that not a lot of people want to invest in, but you need to get things done right from the very beginning. If not, it will be much harder at scale later on.
Yeah, that's a very good point. This is something you need to care about from day one. Because, ideally you're building an app, you're building systems. And even if you're not an app company, you're not building mobile apps or something that's going to go out there. Most companies I've ever worked with nowadays have some level of code or software or something that needs to be customized to help their company run and be efficient. So every company on the face of this planet is now an IT company and has this perspective. And if you build your infrastructure on a weak, sandy foundation at the very beginning, when things start growing, all of a sudden now you're faced with the fact that either you can't grow, or as you grow, you're exposing people to more threats, more issues, and you have to go rebuild things, which can slow down your ability to grow, and even hurt your ability to scale and move that. But the cool thing about the way engineers have worked today, and you mentioned SonarQube is a great foundation. It's not a difficult thing to go implement something like SonarQube and begin scanning from day one. That's something that is very approachable. With all the work that's been done out there to build secure frameworks, to build secure cloud infrastructures, it is actually easy to have security be the default of how you're writing code. But you have to think about that up front. You have to include that and think about kind of in the DevSecOps pipeline. One of the things that we coach and teach a lot in kind of SCRUM and DevSecOps. And while they're not the same thing, you really can't do one without the other. DevSecOps is this concept of when you're writing a solution, you're thinking about how it's going to operate. You're thinking about the impact and the exposure, and you're connecting that operations, security people, the developers into a team and having them work together and think through security up front, operations up front, and you're not throwing things over the wall. And that's really important, but it's much easier to do that now because of tools like SonarQube. The OWASP Top 10 is a really good set of resources. You can go with open source, easy to find, that give you a list of the kind of vulnerabilities you need to be checking for and building. But considering how you're going to operate, where you want it to go up front, so you're not stuck with an oh crap moment. Oh crap, what do I do now? Or even worse, we've outsourced it and now we have these exposures and vulnerabilities. We can't even get our app into the App Store. Or the absolute worst is we've got it to the App Store and now we're in the front page of the next data. And that can kills companies all the time that go into that. So what are some of the tools and other kinds of best practices we need to be considering as a small business today so that we avoid that moment in the future? What are things you've seen in your experience?
Yeah, so as I said, using this basically dovetails on what you have said, Chris. So people really don't understand what DevSecOps is compared to DevOps. They might think it's the same thing. They don't really, they probably invest more into the CI/CD pipeline, for a continuous delivery. They want to get things out fast rather than get them out in a secure way. So that being said, aside from SonarQube, a number of services like GitHub, for example, or GitLab, enable you to have a way to automate your builds in a secure environment in the cloud, aside from doing it locally. This is important because at this point, when you set up this build workflow in a declarative way, it's better to be audited. All the assumptions that you make on your local developer machines or wherever that is gone right now, because you're building another environment that's not compromised, and it's a clean one. So nothing is injected. You can make sure that nothing is injected there. All your secrets management needs to be on point. Any specific access tokens or API keys should be in place, should be you also have the capability to protect them from the eyes of developers that should not really have access to it because they're just working at another layer. For example, this could be the app signing keys that you use for distribution. You don't want anybody stealing those and impersonating your identity and potentially repackaging your apps or whatever that is that you are signing. Now, this is very important because once you have your code in a pipeline like that with a secure workflow, which is not just GitHub, for example, then you can make sure that you can audit it and it's not tampered with. Aside from that, there's other, I wouldn't call them tools, there's other guidelines that you can follow. For example, if you are developing containerized applications, which you probably should because that's the way of the future and that's what everybody has been doing it, and deploying them using a container orchestrator like Kubernetes, there's a great resource by CISA and NSA, which is the Kubernetes Hardening Guide. It's a very lengthy read, unfortunately, as all cybersecurity documents, but it gives great insight into what are the best practices for deploying the application, setting the environment, making sure that they're separated in a good way, that they only have the access they need and not more. Because getting things done in an easy way is definitely not what will make you secure later on. Yeah. As an example for that, I was working for a company a while ago where they basically run everything in a Linux system as administrator because that was all their services run as root. And that definitely is not a good security practice. When I asked, why are you doing this? They were like, because, this makes this easier for us. It's in our environment. It's protected. We don't worry that anything's going to happen. However, if you go into the WASP top 10, there's a lot of SQL injections or potential problems might arise, like insecure storage. You don't want to be doing this in production for sure. There's a general misconception as to how people think they're secure because right now they're running in what they consider a secure environment. And this setting can definitely change later on, especially when you're deploying in a cloud environment.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because, and you mentioned on-prem, and that's definitely something I've seen companies early, maybe a decade ago, we'd look at servers and building that out now. I would say nowadays, you almost need to default to build everything in the cloud. That's probably where it's going to go anyway. And the cool thing about all of the major cloud providers, Google and Google, IBM even, and Azure and Amazon.
Yeah.
All of these they do it by default. They do security by default. It really is, if you lean into what these huge companies that have all of the world's experts are working for them, trying to figure this out. They figured out the hard things, and it makes it much easier to do and make good decisions as a smaller business. And tying in DevSecOps practices, which yes, you can do DevSecOps. We actually have a course that we'll make a link available for free that you can get an idea of what the heck DevSecOps is. But you can do these things by default, even as a small business. One thing that I've had that was really good advice, I think, Nikos, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this. This is a really good friend of mine. They go in and they're looking and helping companies early on and figure out, are they building good products? But they always ask the question of everyone they've ever consulted with. They asked me this before. In what ways can your app, your system, your idea hurt the world? And really think through, and it's things like, if you're working with children, in what ways can you expose children to bad actors? Or in the data, what happens if the worst case scenario happens? And I like that they do that early on. I like it a lot that they do that early on because it makes you think through and plan for those bad scenarios so that you can avoid them, so that you make sure you're doing something that doesn't hurt the world. What are your thoughts on that, or ways that you've worked with companies through those kinds of questions?
That's a great question. And that's probably the first question you should ask when building a software product, especially in the mobile world, because basically the answer would be there's so many ways. Are you dealing with user data, which is pretty much, you will have to access some sensitive data. An app that doesn't do anything on your phone is probably not useful if you think about it. So it will facilitate it will give you some sort of utility. For example, potentially it would be a messaging app, which means that it will enable you to communicate with other people. This would probably want access to your contacts. So yeah, you definitely need to think about, am I accessing the contacts in a secure way? Am I making sure that every information that I store is encrypted at rest, or it's not cannot be potentially exposed to another application running a device, because that's also a thing. Applications within your device can communicate with each other without you knowing about it. They can share storage, they can share contacts, they can potentially share the permissions, especially if they are developed, if they are distributed from the same developer. So yeah, you need to think about all these things, and you also need to think about, if I'm declaring some permissions that my app needs to use, some custom permission, am I protecting this from other applications? Am I just, assuming that nobody would know what I'm doing, so I'm secure, until I fix it? That's not a good security practice. We've also seen this, unfortunately, and we have also seen this in applications that are delivered with the app, with the phone's firmware, which are more privileged than the actual applications that you download from the App Store, from the Play Store or the App Store. This means that these applications are more privileged, and you cannot really get rid of them because they're part of the base operating system that you have been delivered. So that's the thing. Yeah, I would say the answer is definitely do that due diligence before printing anything.
Yeah, really think through, and then always be asking yourself when we're looking at this, if you're product manager, product owner, someone that is helping lead the future of your company, what do I need to be thinking about now? What are those worst case scenarios? How can I mitigate them? First, when we're small, because the way we might mitigate them when we're small might look very different when we're at scale or growing. And having that plan of, all right, cool, this is what we're doing today. This is how we're being security first, security focused, security at the very core of what we're doing. But then what are the things that we want to start adding in, what the tools, the frameworks, the approaches, the people, resources, and how can we lean into kind of industry best practices with that? Nikos, we're getting close. I think we have just a couple more minutes in our time box. If you were to leave the participants of this webinar with something, what is the single most important thing that you would want to have on people's mind when they leave this webinar?
Well, I would say, it's not just one thing. I will reiterate the fact that make sure you budget for a proper and secure architecture. Make sure you protect all the things that are sensitive in your build workflow using a proper DevSecOps pipeline, access keys, that's paramount. And for that, you need to have proper role-based access control. This might seem redundant when your team is small, but your team will get bigger, assuming you get things right. So you will need this. So it's good to have this in place from the very beginning. And definitely audit your code using either open source, either using the source or the binaries. Definitely do that at the very end. You don't want any nasty surprises down the line. A lot of people have gone down that route and think everything is fine, but it's really not. We have seen it. I'm pretty sure we're going to keep on seeing it in the near future.
Yeah, it's the worst thing when you're having to trust someone else, trust another company. Maybe if I were to kind of follow on that, when you're bringing in trusted partners to your startup, you're asking people to help or outsourcing development work, make sure the companies that you are outsourcing to, the partners that you're working with, the software that you're bringing in, make sure that all of it has a clear plan, a coherent plan that's not full of hot air and BS. Have your advisors, your vendors, and the people you're working with give their clear plan on what they're doing to protect your code, to protect their customers, their clients, and more importantly, how they protect your clients and your customers and what they're doing in that. And if they can't give you a good answer and good track record, they can't bring up, here are the things that we have in place that we're doing, then they're probably not a vendor that you need to be working with.
Yeah, I agree.
You might have to spend a little more on the vendor, but it's better off spending a little more on someone that knows how to do that than cheaping out up front and having it bite you in the backside in the long term.
Sooner rather than later.
Yeah, it will bite you. Yeah. Because the reality is cybersecurity exists because hackers and bad actors are absolutely trying to get every vulnerability they can. And it is a very real threat, even to small startups, even to small businesses. And it could be the death knell. The difference between a large business and a small business surviving a cyber attack is this large business has the resources and the insurance and everything to cover it. Sure. Far too often, small businesses don't.
Yeah. That's very true, unfortunately.
Well, I think that wraps us. Leanna, I know you wanted to have some follow-up words. Nikos, thank you very much. It's been wonderful getting to know you and getting to know Quokka, which, by the way, Google that. That is the cutest animal on the face of the planet, next to my puppy. I think my puppy might be a little cuter, but thank you for your time and really cool company with really cool work and insight. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, as always.
Yes, thank you so much. We could easily keep going on this subject, but we really appreciate your time. I'd like to thank our phenomenal members, Chris and Nikos, for giving us insight into your experience and your expertise from the small business perspective. Thank you to CISA and the National Cybersecurity Alliance. And most importantly, thank each of you for listening. We hope that you leave us informed, empowered to elevate cybersecurity awareness and readiness in your organization. Excuse me. Please look out for a recording of this event and additional resources to come. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again soon.